We rely on research to be a mirror, right? Something that reflects the world as it really is. We trust the data we see in the news, at work, pretty much everywhere. But what if that mirror is warped? What if the reflection it's showing us is systematically distorted? Kind of like something you'd see at a carnival funhouse?
Okay, so let's just jump right in with a really big question. Is it even possible for the very way a study is designed, the method it uses, to actually create the results it ends up finding?
Now, you might think this is a settled thing, but in the research world, not even close. There's a huge debate going on. On one side, you have scholars who just dismiss the whole thing as an urban legend. But on the other side, you've got plenty of others who say, no, 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 this is a major threat, something that can totally undermine our findings. And that's really the core of what we're digging into here.
To really wrap our heads around this, we're going to use a simple, but I think a really powerful analogy: the funhouse mirror. So think of it like this. A perfect study? That's a crystal clear mirror. What you see is what's really there. Simple. But method bias, that's a funhouse mirror. And it doesn't just give you a random blurry image. No, it systematically stretches, squishes, and warps the reflection in a really predictable way, making you believe something that isn't quite true.
All right, so let's get a little more technical. What are we actually calling this distortion? What exactly is method bias?
Okay, so method bias is basically an error that comes from the measurement process itself. Let me put it another way. The problem isn't the thing you're trying to measure, let's say job satisfaction. The problem is the noise that gets introduced by how you ask the questions. So where does this pesky distortion even come from? Well, it can sneak in from a few different places. It could come from the person who's answering the survey. Maybe they're in a bad mood, or maybe they're just an agreeable person who says yes to everything. It can also come from the questions themselves, if they're worded in a confusing way, or if they all use the exact same format. And it can even come from the context, like just placing two questions right next to each other can totally influence how they're answered.
All right, so this all sounds pretty convincing, right? But is it just some minor academic quibble, or is this mirror, seriously warped? Let's take a look at the actual evidence. Whoa, okay, this is where it gets really interesting. This slide is visualizing the findings of something called a meta-analysis, which is basically a study of other studies. And what researchers found when they looked at 28 different papers was shocking. On average, 32% of the differences in people's answers, what scientists call variance, had nothing to do with what was being studied. It came purely from the method. Only 46% was the actual trait. That means the method itself left this huge fingerprint all over the data. And check this out, this slide just drives the point home perfectly. Researchers looked at the link between how well an employee feels they fit in and their actual job performance. And the results? They were night and day. When they asked the same person to rate both things, they found a decent link. But when they got the data from different sources, like the employee rated their fit, but their manager rated their performance, that link pretty much disappeared. The method itself literally created a relationship that wasn't really there. Okay, if you're not convinced yet, let's just hit you with one final massive number. When you have the same person rate both their leader's behavior and the results of that leadership, the connection between the two appears on average 239% stronger. I'm going to say that again, 239% stronger. That's not just a distortion, that is a full-blown funhouse mirror of epic proportions. Okay, wow. So the problem is real. The mirror is definitely warped, but, and this is the good news, we can actually fix it. So let's look at the researcher's toolkit for straightening out that reflection. The best way to deal with this is to stop it before it even starts. Researchers can be proactive and design better studies from the get-go. They can get information from different sources, just like we saw. They can also separate when they ask questions. So measure one thing today and another thing a few weeks from now. And honestly, even simple things like mixing up the question formats or just writing clearer questions can make a huge difference. But hey, what if the data is already in the bag? It's not a lost cause. Researchers have statistical tools to clean things up after the fact. They can use something called a marker variable to estimate how much bias is there. Or they can build these really complex statistical models that directly account for and actually remove the distortion caused by the method. Pretty cool. All right, so you might be thinking, this is interesting, but I'm not a scientist. Why does this matter to me? Well, it matters a lot.
because we are all consumers of this research, and understanding this funhouse mirror effect makes you a much smarter, more critical consumer of information. So let's give you a new toolkit. Some simple questions you can ask next time you see a flashy headline about a new study. Ask yourself, who provided the data? Was it all from one person reading everything, like in that leadership study we saw? Did they get information from different places? Just asking these simple questions helps you look past the reflection to see if the mirror itself might be a little warped. So at the end of the day, this is not some academic urban legend to be brushed aside. As the researchers themselves put it, it's a specter, a ghost that can haunt our interpretation of data. And the question it really leaves us with is this: how many of the truths we hold are just distorted reflections in a funhouse mirror?